Now on BBC Two, Newsnight holds a special Prime Minister's Questions with Gordon Brown.
In 5 days, he'll achieve his life's ambition and become Prime Minister. Is he up to it? There hasn't been a contest, there hasn't been a vote. But in less than a week, Gordon Brown will be Prime Minister. Tonight, in a Newsnight special, Gordon Brown faces a panel of BBC journalists about his plans for Britain. Joining me to ask the questions will be the BBC's economics editor, Evan Davis, from Kabul, our world affairs editor, John Simpson, and the BBC's political editor, Nick Robinson. Gordon Brown, welcome. As Chancellor, you're well used to lots of questions about the economy, but as Prime Minister, you're going to be tested on, well, pretty well every area of British life. Now, our questions are going to reflect the views of thousands of people who've been in touch via the BBC website. They want to know about your personal approach and the kind of policies you're going to introduce. I'm going to start off and then my colleagues will join in. So there hasn't been a leadership contest, there hasn't been a general election. What is it about you that means the British people should accept you without a democratic mandate?
Well, I would have welcomed a contest if people had stood against me. It just so happened I got the nominations of the vast majority of our party. But really, the challenges are the ones that I set down, partly in the general election and partly in this campaign. And I think the British people know that when we fought the general election, I spelt out what we wanted to do on both the economy and how we wanted to improve society. We are into a world of new challenges, global competition, climate change, terrorism and security. I feel I have the experience to deal with these challenges. I feel I can help people with rising aspirations in this country, and I feel we can create a country where there is far more opportunity and choice so that we build on the creative talents of the British people.
Chancellor, you've talked about creating a new politics. And yet you've been at the top of politics for a decade. What's wrong with the old politics?
Because I've learned. I've learned a lot in the last 10 years. I've learned that top-down, pulling the lever solutions are not always the ones that are going to work best. And I've learned that if we're going to face the big challenges, climate change, can't do it without personal responsibility, the involvement of people. Global economic competition, I've got to persuade people to upgrade their skills. Terrorism, we've got to win people's hearts and minds. So you really have to involve people and build a national consensus if you're going to solve the challenges of the future.
Now, you say you've learnt. What about involving cabinet colleagues? Do you remember Charles Clarke saying it was very, very difficult to work with him? It was the control freak thing. His massive weakness is that he can't work with people. Have you learnt from that?
I think I can work with people, but of course, as Chancellor, you're telling people no. Look, you know, Charles Clarke or someone comes in and says, I want money, and I say no. When it comes to
forgive me, I could have given you a list of people, not just Charles Clarke. You know that the former cabinet secretary, you know, many of your cabinet colleagues have said privately that they admire you, but they find you very, very, very difficult. And they believe that's about you, not just the job you did.
I have, Nick, got strong convictions. I know what I want to do, but I think I am proving that what it is about being Prime Minister is you've got to bring people in, you've got to build a consensus, you've got to show that you can reach out to people. And I think I've shown in these last few weeks that that's what I want to do, but I accept the proof is in what I do. This will be an inclusive government. This will be a government that will bring people in from all walks of life. And at the same time, I think we can show that we can lead to meet all the challenges of the future.
Bring people in, you say. You did try and bring Paddy Ashdown into your cabinet. But Liberal Democrats thought you were just trying to headhunt a talented man. Did you show any sign that you wanted to listen to what the Liberal Democrats would do in government to maybe change your approach to accommodate theirs?
Well, I think you'll see on the Constitution and on other issues that there's a lot of common ground in British politics. But look, I want to get people of real talent and experience and expertise, not because of party labels, but because they've got something to offer the country. Now, whether it's as advisors, or whether it's doing reviews, or whether it's in other positions of government, I think we have a duty, and I have a duty, to draw on the best people and to get the experience and the wisdom of people who can make a contribution because they have national standing to our national life.
But the real symbol many people think of a new politics would be if you'd said, I need to learn from these Liberal Democrats. I will actually reach some sort of partnership with them. What you did is say, can I embarrass them by taking their former guy and giving him a job that frankly doesn't matter much in the formation of domestic politics?
Not at all. Paddy Ashdown has got a great expertise in Northern Ireland affairs. He's chairman of the Parades Commission. He comes from Northern Ireland. He's been a soldier in Northern Ireland. I'm looking at how people can make a contribution to our national life in a variety of different ways. One is, of course, helping in specifics, from culture to the economy to the arts to security. We have got, in the modern world, to be able to draw on something wider than just Westminster if we're going to govern effectively. And look, you know, the biggest problem in our country is you've got to build a national consensus. You've got to have a sense of shared purpose if you're going to solve problems, and therefore you've got to be inclusive.
Mr. Brown, can I look at another aspect of the new era in politics we're in for? Spin and all of that. Let me take a small example that kind of got at me because I'm an economics journalist. After the budget, we were trying to work out winners and losers and all those things. The Treasury helpfully gave us examples of winners from the budget, but they couldn't give us any examples of losers. Are you really the man to take us into an era devoid of spin?
Well, look, in the budget, I said, look, we're losing the 10p rate. We're giving people more money on the working tax credit. We're raising the pensioners' tax allowances. It was all set down there. Now, looking at the impact on the different groups, pensioners, people in employment, families, we have published table after table of the effect on that, to the extent to which people, I think, are bored with the information that they're getting.
But you didn't tell us the losers.
Well,
they were unable to tell us a single example of a losing household. There were 5 million of them to pick, and they couldn't find one.
Evan, I'm sorry if that happened, but I think you'll have seen in parliamentary answer after parliamentary answer, we have published tables of what the effect is going to be.
If we're in for this new era, let me just give you a few quick fire questions for straight answers. Are taxes higher or lower now as a percentage of national income than when Labour came to power?
Because of national insurance, yes. But the tax rate, of course, the income tax rate has gone down from 23 pence to 20 pence.
You were very clear, thank you. You would have failed the golden rule if you'd stuck to the original definition of the economic cycle.
Well, we would have met the golden rule because we would have done things differently. It was because we looked at how the golden rule would work for the future that we were able to publish the new figures, but we would have met the golden rule whatever happened.
Okay. In the first budget or pre-budget after the last 3 elections, you've announced tax rises that weren't mentioned in the election campaign.
I don't accept that. I think we
that
have said...
isn't a matter of record in the books. I mean, every time.
We said, for example, before we raised national insurance on the health service, that we were reviewing the health service to look at what we should do. I think at all times I've tried to be straight with the British people about what we need to do.
In every election, taxes have gone up in the first budget or pre-budget.
I don't accept that we didn't tell the electorate about the challenges we faced ahead. We had a huge debate in the general election of 2001 about the need to finance our health service.
Well, let's pick up on that issue of tax, which, as you can imagine, lots of people got in touch with the website about. In the past, you've ruled out increasing the top rate of tax. Will you do that again now?
Well, that's our position. It's in our manifesto.
And is that your position for the foreseeable future?
Well, I'm not going to announce here the manifesto for the next election, Martha. You wouldn't expect me to do that. It's tempting when you have such eminent and experienced journalists to do that. But I'm not going to announce the next manifesto. What I do say is we'll stick to this manifesto.
You're not trusted on tax. That's the problem. It's the whole business of national insurance. You were questioned about it in detail in the 2001 election. Then taxes went up. So do you think people really take your word on tax?
I think people know that the net effect of what we've done is we've reduced the basic rate of income tax, we've now reduced the basic rate of corporation tax, we've made major reforms in the taxation system. But yes, I've always said, and I've said it on every occasion, that to finance the National Health Service, we raised national insurance, and it was the one way that we could make sure that resources went to the National Health Service. And I believe that the public still support what we had to do to make the National Health Service have the funds.
It wasn't said before the election, though, was it?
What we said before the election is that we were reviewing the National Health Service. We had a committee that was looking at it. Mr. Wanless was the person doing the review. That was all set out, Evan.
OK, let's going to move on to broader questions now about the shape of Britain, the kind of country you'd like to see, Evan.
The entrepreneurial society that, to some extent, we're living in, it's one that has a lot of upsides. A lot of people get very rich out of it, but of course the gaps between the very rich and the very poor have widened over the last 10 years. One of your own advisors, Sir Ronald Kearney, this week said that gap could ignite a violent reaction. Do you see that as a genuine threat?
I think inequality... Look, this is a big issue because it's happening around the world. It's happening in America and Europe. Inequality and the gap between rich and poor is an issue. It's something that people are looking at. And I would say this, if you want to make globalization work, and this is the issue, it comes back to the nature of the changes taking place in our world economy, then if you want free markets, open trade, flexibility, you're going to have to invest in people's education and equipping them for the future, and you're therefore going to have to spend money on that enables people to benefit from globalization. And that's the real issue. Can people benefit from globalization? Can they be victims or can they be beneficiaries? And I think by recognizing that this is a problem, we may need international action to deal with it. It cannot simply be solved in one country.
But what you're saying in effect there is, as now, you want to help those at the bottom, but people can get as rich as they like in Brown's Britain, and uncomfortable though it might be, you seem to be saying, so be it, that's life.
Well, I want people to get on, and I applaud people who do well.
Even if they don't pay much tax, even if they earn a fortune, even if the gap grows bigger and bigger.
They've got to pay their fair share of tax. They've got to pay their fair share of tax, and that's why on the private equity, we set up a review three months ago in March to look at that issue.
You see, some people think that the big issue in British politics now isn't about economic support anymore. It's not about a broken economy. It's about a broken society. Not just inequality, but poor behaviour, miserable living standards for some people. Do you accept that government can and should do something about a broken society?
Well, I was talking about this week because, yes, we've created a stronger economy, but yes, in the next 10 years, what I really want to see happening is both a stronger economy and a stronger society. And I was drawing attention to some of the problems of discipline in schools, parenting that's poor for children that end up being excluded, children losing their way, particularly boys not doing well in schools and not realising the potential, the problems of young offenders. Now, we will have to deal with each of these problems, but what I don't accept is that British society is so weak that we cannot solve these problems.
I'd like to move on to foreign policy now and the issue which will probably going to be your greatest challenge as Prime Minister, which is Iraq, and something that vast quantities of the people in this country are very, very concerned about. Harriet Harman, Labour Minister, said recently that the government ought to say sorry for the mistakes that have been made in Iraq and for the way that the war was sold. Are you prepared to say sorry?
We have apologised, and I repeat that, for the mistakes that were made in intelligence. I also think, and I think we've got to be honest about it, that mistakes were made at the point of reconstruction after Saddam Hussein fell. Now, it's
mistakes made by the British government, or are you blaming the
Americans?
Mistakes
made by all of us in the reconstruction process. And look, if you're looking at Iraq now, what you're really talking about is security that's got to be combined with some form of political reconciliation, plus people have got to have a stake in the future. And that's what I think is the way forward for Iraq.
But just to be clear about this, what exactly are you apologising for? Are you saying that there were mistakes made in the run-up to the war, that perhaps we shouldn't have gone to war?
I made it absolutely clear, Martha, the mistakes that were made in intelligence have been apologised for. I mean, Tony Blair went to the House of Commons to do this after the Butler review. At the same time, I accept that after Saddam Hussein fell, and it is a good thing that he is out, it is a good thing that Iraq is a democracy, it is a good thing that people are able to vote. But after that happened, I think the reconstruction process did not go as... And I have got proposals.
Sorry yourself? Are you saying sorry?
I accept my collective responsibility as the government accepts its collective responsibility.
OK, well, we're going to continue with this subject now by bringing in the BBC's World Affairs editor, John Simpson, who joins us from Kabul in Afghanistan.
Chancellor, every single British ambassador I've spoken to privately about this, every single British general I've spoken privately about it, every single cabinet minister, indeed, that I've spoken privately to about Iraq says the whole thing was a disaster. I go there, every few weeks, and I know the extent of it. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's now, as a direct result of the British and American invasion, it's now one of the two most failed states in the world. And yet you voted for it in the House of Commons when the vote came up. Knowing what you know now, knowing what a disaster the whole thing has been, would you vote for it now?
Well, we voted on the basis of what I believe is still the central point. Saddam Hussein continued over 12 years to break all the international resolutions, all the UN resolutions. He continued to defy the will of the United Nations. It was an unacceptable situation, and it had to be dealt with. Now, look, I've accepted that there were mistakes in intelligence made by the government at the time. I've also accepted that the reconstruction has not worked well. But let us not ignore the fact that we are where we are and we've got to move forward now. And I think you would agree from your experience of Iraq, there are far too few people in Iraq who've got a stake in the future. And that is really the challenge that is faced by the government at the moment in Iraq, and it's the challenge that are faced by our forces.
General Sir Richard Dannett, who's the Chief of the General Staff, said last year that having British troops there was actually adding to the problem. He wanted them withdrawn. The Prime Minister, Tony Blair, said to leave before the Iraqis can handle security would be a complete betrayal, not only of the Iraqi people, but of all the sacrifices our armed forces have made. So which is it? Are we making things worse, or should we stay?
Well, look, we've brought down the number of forces, as you know, John, yourself, and I do applaud, by the way, your reports from Afghanistan this week, from 44,000 to just about 5,000. So the numbers have gone down dramatically over the last period of time. But I think you would accept also that the obligations to Iraq arise from United Nations resolutions, from promises we've made to the Iraqi administration itself to back up the democracy and to help them move to a situation which we've actually moved 2 and 3 provinces out of 4, where the security is handed over from the British Army to the Iraqi police and military forces. Now, we've done that in 3 provinces. We've still to do it in one province. So things in the south of the country, in the Basra area, are moving all the time. And I believe that we will move to an overwatch position in the 4th province at some point very soon.
Mr. Brown, I travelled with you to Baghdad recently.
We went there, yeah.
And while you were there, you said you wouldn't mix politics and intelligence again, and that there were ways that you would deal with that. People have heard you on this programme say that the government apologised, that the intelligence was wrong. I don't think that's the apology some people are looking for. Lord Butler said that the impression given was that the intelligence was fuller and firmer than it actually was. That's what many viewers will regard as spinning the intelligence to suit the government's case. So are you apologising for somebody else, saying, oh, these intelligence boys got it wrong? Or are you saying we politicians, we got it wrong? We presented something much firmer than it really was.
Not only, Nick, have we made that apology in the House of Commons, but also I'm setting in place what I think are far more rigorous procedures, so that the intelligence is seen to be different from, if you like, any decision by a politician. And when it's published, if it is published, of course, intelligence has got to go through a process where that is seen to be the case. Now, these are 2 quite big changes that I'm proposing to bring in, so that I want people to know that in future they can be satisfied that where public information is provided, it has gone through an authoritative process and it is free of political influence. And I think that change is an important one we'll see over the next few weeks.
Let's look at the impact of the Iraq War. We know the September 11th attack on the United States happened before Iraq, but do you think that it's made Britain a less safe place?
Look, we've got, let's be honest, we've got hundreds of people who we are worried about may be potentially involved in terrorist activity. And that's why the former head of the security services said herself about the number of people that they had to track. But this is a battle of hearts and minds that we've got to win. You see,
but is that battle related to the issue of Iraq? That's what I want to establish. In examining hearts and minds, you have to look at the underlying causes. Do you think it's related to Iraq? The Joint Intelligence Committee has said that Iraq is likely to be an important motivating factor for some time to come in the radicalisation of British Muslims and for those extremists who view attacks against the UK as legitimate.
But Martha,
do you agree with that analysis?
Well, wherever there's an international incident and wherever Al-Qaeda is involved, as they are in Iraq, it is bound to be an issue. But look, let's get to the bottom of what's actually going on here. We have a group of people, probably 60 or so groups linked to Al-Qaeda. They've got 5,000 websites around the world. They're preaching terrorist propaganda. They are calling on people to take action against Israel, to take action against the West. They're calling on people to murder other people, and they're supporting extremist violence. Now, we can win this battle in one way by military and security and intelligence information, only to a certain point. We have got to win what I call the battle of hearts and minds. And over these next few years, I believe this issue of terrorist activity, we move to a new footing, a new opening, a new frontier in this. And that is culturally, politically, by journals, by magazines, by newspapers, by debates at a cultural level as well as at a political level. We persuade people that moderate opinion can survive an assault from extremist opinion in religious dogma. Now, if we can do that, and bring on moderate opinion, support the reformers, and isolate the extremists from moderate opinion, I believe that's the major way that we'll win progress, and it's a different approach that has got to be taken from now on.
Well, let's now rejoin our World Affairs editor, John Simpson, in Kabul.
Perhaps I just want to ask you this key question about the Atlantic Alliance. Throughout Britain and much of the world, when he was Prime Minister, while he's been Prime Minister, Tony Blair has been accused of being President Bush's poodle, to have handed over Britain's independence to help America's foreign policy. Are you going to do the same thing, or are you going to be an independent Prime Minister for Britain? In other words, is it going to be Yo Brown, just as it was Yo Blair?
Any foreign policy that I manage or have responsibility for has got to be about our national interest. But it is in our national interest that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has a good relationship with the President of the United States of America. I think what's really happening over these last few months is that people are starting to recognise that multilateral ways forward, whether it's reforming the international institutions, whether it's over Iran, whether it's over Russia, that the multilateral ways forward should be given a better chance in future than perhaps they've had in previous years. And I want to promote the reform of international institutions. I want to promote a stronger relationship between America and Europe. And of course, I have proposals I've already made, John, to involve India, China in the workings of the international institutions in a way that perhaps we have been too slow to recognise should be done in the years to come.
Mr. Brown, you've now met President Bush. Is he more impressive in private than many people think he is in public?
Well, of course, if people criticise him in public, to meet him in private is a chance to hear what he is saying about all the major issues, and I find it a very informative and enlightening discussion. And I just repeat...
And he's impressive.
I just repeat, any British Prime Minister that doesn't have a strong relationship with the President of the United States of America, just as any British Prime Minister that doesn't have good relationships with the European Union, would be failing in our duty. And those people who say, and I think the Conservatives are falling into this trap, that we're going to be independent of America and independent of Europe, the whole business of foreign policy is about building alliances for change and for progress. And I'm going to be very much part of that. And that extends, of course, to the new developing countries who I believe want to work with Britain to solve some of the problems, climate change, world debt, some of the problems of the future.
Let me pick up, if I may, on the question of our relationship with the European Union. Do you think that there should be a referendum on the treaty which is being negotiated as we speak? I think you're probably on the phone to Tony Blair about it all the time. Should there be a referendum?
Well, if it were necessary, there should be a referendum. And what we've got to do is look at what comes out of these discussions. This is no longer a new constitution. It's an amending treaty. It's rather similar to Amsterdam, Nice in terms of being an amending treaty rather than a new constitution. Now, let's see what comes out of it. We've set down pretty clear red lines. The negotiations are going on. I think it's premature for me to pronounce on any negotiations.
Why not let the public decide about the red lines? You believe in a new kind of politics. You keep telling us that you want to devolve power. If you're so certain that you're going to have an outcome that won't need a referendum, why not let the British people decide on a vote?
The constitutional proposals I will bring forward will be in a whole range of different areas. But the test on this European amending treaty is surely... We didn't have a referendum on Maastricht, we didn't have one on Nice, we didn't have one on Amsterdam. You've got to have a test by which a referendum would have to be met.
But arguably that's one of the big problems with the European Union, isn't it? There's a democratic deficit that people don't feel engaged.
Yeah, but the democratic deficit is the sense that people have that governments should work and parliaments should work better with the European Union. I don't think most of the countries in the European Union even adopt the idea of a referendum. The question is, does the change justify a referendum? Let's see what comes out of the negotiations. If our red lines, so to speak, if what we are saying is important is met, then it's unlikely there would be a need for a referendum.
Can I ask you about the euro?
Yeah.
Officially, our policy is prepare and decide. There's even, I think, a preparations unit at the Treasury beavering away on the preparations as we speak. We know we're not going to join under Prime Minister Brown. Why don't you just decide, and then we don't have to worry about
Well, hold on. I've said in principle it would be a good thing to have monetary union. And in principle, far greater cooperation between all the currencies of the world is also a good thing. But in practice, the conditions that I set down have not been met. And
Please don't go through them.
No, I'm not going to go through the
Are you
five tests.
seriously saying there's a prospect that Britain could conceivably join the euro in the next 8 years?
It is unlikely in this year because we already made a decision.
Very unlikely this year.
It's
Let's agree
unlikely
on
next
that.
year.
It's inconceivable, isn't it?
Look, you know, basically, in principle, currency alignment is a good thing because it is a
Yes,
stabiliser.
we're not
You
gonna
agree
join
as
the
an
euro,
economist. In practice, look, I think I got that right.
OK, well, before we get on to the 5 tests, let's move on from the euro. Nick.
You will be the first Prime Minister from a Scottish constituency since devolution. Are you comfortable with the fact that students from Scotland, Lithuania, Poland, France don't pay tuition fees to study at Scottish universities, but if you just happen to come from England and Wales, you do?
Well, the decision is one that was devolved to the Scottish Parliament. It was devolved by a vote of the Westminster Parliament and then confirmed actually in a referendum. The question for the Scottish Parliament is, in all the decisions that they make, they've got to work within a budget. And if they overspend in one area, they've got to cut back in another area.
Forgive me, the
And
question
that's
for
their
most people watching is it fair?
If a decision is made to devolve power, and you give people the freedom to make their decision about how that power is used in a particular area, and if that's confirmed by a referendum and by a vote of the Westminster Parliament, I think you've got to accept the results. The problem for the Scottish Parliament or the Welsh Assembly, or indeed because I've got to deal with the Northern Ireland Executive and Assembly as well, is that they have a budget. If they decide to spend on one area, then people will lose out in another area as a result of that.
But you will not be able to be held to account in your constituency for many of the decisions that you will actually take for the people of the rest of the country. So when you decide on schools and hospitals for the people of England, and sometimes for the people of Wales on other areas too, no voter will actually have a vote for or against Gordon Brown because you live in Scotland where those things don't apply.
But Nick, this is what devolution is about. We are a United Kingdom Parliament, however. We make our decisions in the areas that we've not devolved. Anything that, in my view, would damage the unity of that Parliament is a bad thing. So I wouldn't favour, for example, English votes for English laws, but I do understand that all parts of the United Kingdom deserve the right to be heard and deserve the right to be heard.
Just briefly, is your message effectively get used to it? Or are you saying there may be a solution to the English problem that some people describe?
I think you've got to continue to look at the evolution of the Constitution, and you've got to be sensitive to the needs of 85% of the population who are English partners in the Union, as well as the needs of the rest of the Union.
Well, let's move on to a subject related to this, but it's one of a great deal of concern to our viewers and listeners, and that's the health service, Evan.
Yes, Mr Brown, I think 6 months ago I was in some doubt about which direction you would take as a Prime Minister, whether you would out-Blair on being reformist or whether you would, if you like, reverse all of that and go back to a sort of a more top-down centralised model. I think we've had an answer in the last couple of weeks, haven't we? It's pretty clear. You are actually wanting to pursue reform in these areas. Am I right to interpret your speeches
Absolutely.
lately?
I think on education you saw what I said about city academies, about specialist schools, about setting by subject. Look, the only thing that matters in education really is can we raise ourselves to world-class standards?
So let's go to the health service. Is there an upper limit to the number of private clinics doing NHS operations? It's about 10%, I think, now. People have talked about 15% being a target or an upper limit. Do you have in your mind
It's what works that's going to matter here. I mean,
what's your gut feeling as to what
my
works?
gut feeling is that there are certain areas, for example, in the hip joint operations or cataracts, where the independent treatment centres have really been very good. Equally, we mustn't forget, and you as an economist know this very well, that if you've got a hospital that is the only accident and emergency hospital for the area, if it's the only one providing maternity services, if it's the only one doing sort of urgent operations where people are referred quickly, then you cannot allow that hospital to go bust, because that is the only form of service in the area. So health is rather different from the economics of any other service, and you've got to recognise both the relationship between the doctor and the patient is different, and you need these facilities and you can't allow them to go under.
Here's a difficult one that you must have thought of. Tony Blair became the first British Prime Minister ever to be interviewed in a criminal investigation. You must have given quite a lot of thought to how you avoid being the second. How?
Well, I think people have learned about party financing. It's got to be completely divorced where possible from public offices of state. But equally, you know, this is a police inquiry that has not concluded, and I think it's quite difficult to draw conclusions about what lessons you learn in total from it until you know actually what has really happened and what is going to be reported on. And so I think it would be premature for us to judge what the results of that inquiry are.
But I think the general lesson many people think they can do, because obviously it's not fair to comment on this investigation, is that politicians in New Labour became just too close to people with a lot of money who were prepared to give it to the party.
Well, I don't think anybody's ever said that of me, and I don't want that to be assumed of anybody else, but nobody's ever said that of me. And what I want to put in place, as you probably know, is a new system of political party funding. There's a lot of discussion about it at the moment, about the limits to contributions, about the limits to total expenditure. But of course, you're going to have to get an all-party consensus, or at least try to get an all-party consensus to do that.
One last question, Gordon Brown. Next week, you're going to be going through the door of number 10 as Prime Minister, the job that you've always wanted. How are you going to celebrate?
I don't want you to assume it's the job I've always wanted. I wanted to be a member of Parliament. It's only since being in Parliament that I've seen the opportunities to do things. But equally, I hope I'll be able to celebrate during July with my son's first birthday and all sorts of other things at the same time. But there's a lot of work to do.
So you're not going to celebrate on the day itself?
I think getting on with the job is the most important thing, and I think that's what the public expect of me.
Thank you very much indeed, Gordon Brown. That's all from Newsnight tonight. Jeremy will be here on Monday. From everyone on the programme, a very good night.